During the Mists of Pandaria remix game mode at the end of Dragonflight, we got to experience a rehashed version of one of WoW's most beloved classic expansions, with an increase of literal infinite power increases, loads and loads of rewards, and a speedrunning genre WoW hadn't quite seen yet. In this video, we're going to discuss 10 things that we want to see from Blizzard's recently announced Legion's remix. And at number 10, we have Raiding Plus, name pending. Alright, now hear us out on this one. In the previous version of Remix, it was pretty easy to find LFG groups and people trying to clear content, even Mythic Siege of Orgrimmar as quickly as they possibly could. This was pretty possible as well, as even 10 people in max eye level gear during the first Remix were able to steamroll content for another 10 players on Mythic. But Mythic difficulty in original Mists of Pandaria is miles different than Mythic Tomb of Sargeras, for example. The mechanics will very likely actually matter, at least a little, and slow down groups or cause people to go back and learn mechanics of the raid as it was. This would obviously impede people on their quest to clear the content as fast as possible to reap the rewards, and possibly dissuade people altogether from running the Legion raids on Mythic at all. A potential solution to this problem, and maybe even a test for regular retail, is a Mythic Plus style version of raiding set to heroic difficulties only, meaning none of the fight's Mythic mechanics will occur. This could scale up to a certain point, but will mostly serve as a complete the raid in X minute system just for fun. This way, people will not really need to learn the fight mechanics and allow the overpowered scaling of the players in Remix to really test their mettle. Think of it more like challenge modes in MoB, where you just had to do the dungeon super fast and that was it. It didn't scale higher and higher or add affixes, but those could be optional, and the faster you were, the greater the rewards. There's a lot of convolution towards an idea like this, and it opens up a very larger discussion. So let us know what you think. What would make a concept like this good or bad? It's mainly why it's only number 10, as the larger points are unrefined, but the intent fits with the remix game mode, we believe. And at number 9, we have brand new mounts. In the previous remix mode, we had a ton of mounts available to us, even the super rare world boss and mythic Garrosh ones. You could purchase these with the universal bronze currency you earn through virtually any bit of content in Remix. The very many recolors were appreciated by collectors, especially those starting out and getting those breakpoint achievements like the 400 plus total mounts and so on. But perhaps as a side effect of MoB's age, the recolors of the mounts don't look particularly amazing. Having around 7 to 8 different crane mounts is cool and all, but eventually, it seems like less could be more. What we're proposing here is more brand new mounts or recolors of less frequently occurring models in exchange for less of the same recolors over and over. For example, multiple Urzul recolors can be good as there are only 2 collectible versions in the game. An opposite of this are the very many but various moose mounts. We love them, but there's already a plethora to choose from. It's either this or brand new models altogether. We understand this can be very low priority, however, and people would just be happier to have a larger mount count at the end of the day, so it's only number 9. And at number 8, we have purchasable battle pets. During Mists of Pandaria, the feature of battle pets in WoW, you'd imagine that the battle pets would have been accessible to players through the bronze currency. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and hardcore collectors of these pets still had to go out into the wild and locate the very specific pets they desired for their collections. In order to more attract people to the space, it would feel like a good idea to allow every purchasable battle pet to be given the rare quality. Perhaps you can even purchase training stones to power level your newly bought pets with the same bronze currency to come in Legion. It would simplify the hassle of collectors and even possibly bring more players into the field when in search of 100%ing their remix playthroughs. But battle pets have never been a super popular format of WoW content, so we understand why Blizzard may have forgotten or just dismissed this concept. And at number 7, we have more Legendaries. During the original Legion expansion, players could customize their character's gear with specially earned legendary items. They could be obtained through virtually any source of content in Legion, and their drop rate wasn't exactly the best. It wasn't until the final patches of Legion did Blizzard add a vendor which could allow players to purchase a specifically desired legendary for the character through another universally earned currency called Waking Essences. Suffice to say, the legendary loot table was very large in Legion, as you could equip 2 legendary items at a time, and Blizzard had to design legendaries for every single spec in the game. Additionally, there were role-specific and all-class type legendaries introduced into this loot table, so getting the one you wanted was quite difficult until the vendor was introduced. This may seem daunting, but with so many class changes and even newer classes introduced since Legion, we think it best to just add even more. It even may be fun to allow every single slot of your character to be a legendary and allow the overpowered aspect of Remix to be various legendary items you were wearing on your character, almost like a Diablo 3/4 build. Or make them the new gems that you can insert into your character's gear. Blizzard has even said they plan to introduce world tiers on a similar level to Diablo's design. If you're unfamiliar with the concept, it essentially allows players to higher or lower the difficulty of their game on an open world and instance level. It does not scale infinitely, but with each increase of world tier, it typically yields higher rewards. So maybe Blizzard is already intending to make Legion Remix WoW's version of a Diablo game. Who knows? Let us know what you think they're planning. And at number 6, we have the return of MOT Remix rewards. For those who may have missed MOT Remix or just didn't manage to buy every item available at the time, it would be nice if Blizzard allowed you to revisit these missed collections through Legion Remix. It's not super important that they do, but it certainly wouldn't be a downside to the experience of Remix, and allows the players who missed out to play for even longer and have more to look forward to. Additionally, Blizzard has been adding the old Remix items to the trading post over time, but it seems easier to just allow them to return in Legion, so players can reserve their traders' tenders for items they desire more and not feel any sort of FOMO. And at number 5, we have new Demon Hunter races and Metamorphosis forms. Alright, it's been long enough for Demon Hunter players. So long in fact that Blizzard is revisiting their expansion for the nostalgia fun in games. I mean, Legion was released in 2016. That's nearly 10 years ago now. But it feels like yesterday sometimes, right? Regardless, Demon Hunter players have been stuck with just Night Elf and Blood Elves since then, and haven't been able to play any other races, which is quite a shame. There could be plenty of ways to introduce other races to the ways of the Illidari, but with the Legion's defeat, it's just difficult to justify their methods and process to create more of them. However, with the Legion sort of returning, perhaps this is the best time to introduce a new race to the Demon Hunter class overall. I'm sure tons of people would be down for playable Draenei or Orc Demon Hunters. We aren't suggesting something like Gnome or Volpera Demon Hunters, just some more options. And if they can't do this, then the very least we'd want to see some more customization for the Metamorphosis forms. They spend a very large time in these forms, and the only outlier in how they look is that if you're male or female, Night Elf or Blood Elf, they all look remarkably similar. Additionally, colorations, demon types, or even just an option to stay normal could go a long way for Demon Hunter players, and give them some well-earned love. Where would we be without the Chaos brand raid buff after all? And at number 4, we have the PvP Ensemble Rewards. Similar to the Battle Pet scenario we played out at Entry 8, Blizzard shorthanded the PvP enjoyers a mob. We understand that Remix is an entirely PvE-based event, and it can be easy to forget about the PvP that's associated with the expansion. But it can feel weird for players when they're scrolling through their collection tabs and see a blank space where Mists of Pandaria content is, because they haven't done a lot of PvP to buy the old sets. We also know that if you want a legacy PvP set, that farming 12 Marks of Honor isn't super difficult task, or does it really take that long? Which only begs the question then, why not just allow us to buy them anyways? PvP can be a daunting space for players, and sometimes people avoid it altogether because of the stigma surrounding it. It would be desirable, we think, of players if they could truly 100% in expansions collectibles, because of allowing PvP sets to be purchased through the bronze-like currency to be introduced in Legion Remix. Plus, it just makes it a lot simpler if someone can buy every PvP set on a single character, but it collects it for every class over time, allowing someone to not have to mill around a bunch of Marks of Honor for their Priest, Mage, and then finally a Warlock set that they want. We aren't saying to allow elite sets to be brought back from Legion, but that in itself isn't a bad idea either. Do PvPers really care about the elite sets they earned nearly 10 years ago now? Does Blizzard? Who really knows, but that's a topic for another time. And at number 3, we have cross-faction queuing and questing. As it currently stands with cross-faction content, you can join pre-made LFG groups and invite your friends without restrictions based around your faction type. Horde or Alliance in this context does not matter, and has allowed endgame WoW to thrive and not have incidents of content drought because the faction is relatively inactive. You can also queue into LFG dungeons so long as your entire group is cross-faction, but this is pretty limiting and only really works if you have 4 other friends down to do the same content as you at the moment. And that could be something as mundane as heroic dungeon queuing. However, that's where the cross-faction line ends and players begin to experience the effects of Horde versus Alliance once again. If you wanted to queue into an LFR raid or any sort of dungeon as just an Alliance DPS player, you would then need to group up to fill with just Alliance players. This means that when you are in need of that final tank to sign up, they could be Horde, and you'd never actually know they wanted to do the same content as you. This also applies for questing to an extent. You can group up and do quests together, but this has generally buggy interactions, where quest credit does not complete simultaneously, and it basically just feels like you're questing solo, but with a Warlord's a droid or bodyguard that you have to sometimes wait up on. What we are proposing is Blizzard removes these restrictions and patches these bugs to allow the most seamless flow of gameplay between Alliance and Horde players as possible. It's been a requested feature for a while, since cross-faction was introduced even, and there isn't a downside in it, we think. It just allows queues to speed up and the game to thrive more when you just have easier access to up to 50% more players, especially when Remix starts to reach its midpoint, as a lot of players may have finished their journeys in Remix, and this would allow a still larger player base to interact with each other more easily. At the tail end, more players start to rush in emergency frequencies to get the items they missed out on, but either way, this function will allow an overall smoother experience for the average Remix player. This additionally benefits retail on its own for the same reasons, just on a smaller level. And at number 2, we want no frog incidents. Alright, so for some context, in Mists of Pandaria itself in Remix, there were NPCs on the Timeless Isle called gulp frogs. They would spawn at an incredible pace when farmed on repeat with an active group, and constantly dropped a currency called Timeless Coins in MoP, and bronze in Remix. As we mentioned previously, this bronze currency is used in virtually everything Remix related, and allowed people to essentially skip days or even weeks of player progression in hours. People could use this to insanely quickly earn bronze to upgrade their character's item level and become overpowered, as Blizzard intended in the long run much faster. With this jump in power, these players were able to farm the harder bits of Remix content in record time. It might sound fine if you're willing to put up with just killing a bunch of frogs for hours and hours at a time, but because this method of power progression was not intended by Blizzard, they removed players' abilities to farm these frogs in Great Succession for gear upgrades. The downside to this was that the players who got super far ahead were able to keep their upgraded gear for the rest of Remix's duration, and those who were not fortunate enough to abuse early and often were left to Blizzard's original intent and farmed for longer. The farm on its own wasn't bad from Blizzard's perspective, but it surely felt bad for people who missed out on the frog farming. It got to a point that if you weren't a super geared frog farmer, you wouldn't get invited to Mythic or even heroic Siege of Orgrimmar raiding. This especially sucked as people needed the Bones of Manaroth items that dropped from Garrosh Hellscream at the time, as they were used to purchase the Tusk of Manaroth and the Hellscream heirloom weapons, which were previously FOMO to just original Mists of Pandaria. It eventually got better for people, but the beginning of Remix was just frog farm as much as you could, and then players trying to find the next best frog farm in place so that they could skip Blizzard's intended idea of progression. Essentially, we're asking that Blizzard doesn't have another occurrence of this in Legion Remix, and players manage to be all on the same page as one another from start to finish. Admittedly, Blizzard did punish people who abused this frog farm by setting their Cloak of Infinite Potential, an artifact cloak that literally scaled infinitely, back many levels, and removed a larger cluster of their bronze. But if the bronze was spent on gear or just cosmetics, then the damage was unfortunately already done. So let's just hope this gets avoided next time around. And at number 1, we have the Mage Tower artifact weapons. Alright Blizzard, it's been nearly a decade since Legion, and a lot of people have missed out on the Mage Tower artifact weapon appearances. We understand to have all of them for Legion when it was current was a huge stepping stone for players that showed up with their skills. But skill does not equate to playing at a certain period of time in an expansion, especially after so much time has passed. There are plenty of players in the modern day who could overcome the challenges from the past, and it feels fair to at least give them a shot that they may have never had previously. The Mage Tower artifact weapons have some of the coolest designs unique to every specialization of WoW. And there continues to be posts on social media to this day of new players asking how to obtain them. It seems unjust to gatekeep someone just because they didn't play at the time. Additionally, the Mage Tower was actually very well received by the players in Legion for the challenge it provided, in really forcing players to learn the ins and outs of their class and spec at the time. We also understand that the Mage Tower was re-added in Shadowlands, but the boss fights hadn't changed, meaning people had many times to practice them over and over, and their challenge starts to date over time. It would be interesting if Blizzard added brand new fights to the Mage Tower in the Legion remix to truly reiterate the challenges that players of the past face. It would make sense if your remix power-ups were disabled in this mode, and your eye level was set to a specific state so that you can't just steamroll the content. But maybe it can be, and the boss HP and damage is just insanely high also. Who knows? At the very least, it would be awesome if Blizzard could re-add the weapon models back at a rate that we can receive them, but with recolors different to the original Legion. It'd be a shame to let them go to waste when plenty of people want them back. So it's a huge want from us once Legion Remix is out. And that completes our list. What are some things you would like to see from Legion Remix? Do you agree with anything we have to say about what we'd like? Let us know down in the comments and your thoughts, and let's hope Blizzard can adhere to another successful passage back in time.